The news came on a gray, rain-smeared morning. My phone vibrated insistently against the kitchen counter as I sipped my lukewarm coffee. A text from an unknown number had arrived. Saddam Hussein, you are hereby notified of the passing of your Aunt Maribel. Check your email for details. Aunt Maribel had always been an enigma in my life. She was the aunt everyone whispered about but never fully understood. Tall, elegant, with hair like burnished copper. She carried herself as if the world itself were a stage and she the star. I hadn't seen her in years. Not since I was 12, when she had taken me aside in her cluttered attic and whispered strange, almost mystical things about destiny and the choices that define a life. I opened my laptop, heart thudding in anticipation. Her will had been emailed as a scanned PDF. The signature at the bottom curled like a delicate flourish. She left me her entire estate. Her small Victorian house, a collection of rare books, and a peculiar black velvet jewelry box that I remembered from childhood. But there was a catch, her voice echoing from the attic all those years ago, now ringing clearer than any legalese. I had to live 1 year as the person she believed I truly was. I laughed nervously at first. What does that even mean? I murmured to the empty kitchen, my own reflection staring back at me from the dark window. But as I scrolled through her letter, her intentions became increasingly strange, almost surreal. Maribel had always sensed something in me, a side of me I hadn't yet acknowledged. She had written, Saddam, the world may not see you as I did, but I always knew. You must embrace your truest self for 1 full year. In doing so, you will inherit more than wealth. You will inherit clarity. Your life begins anew, in the form I have chosen for you. I shivered. The final paragraph instructed me to open the black velvet box immediately. I obeyed, hands trembling, and lifted the lid. Inside lay a pair of delicate, silk-lined gloves and a small vial containing a shimmering, almost ethereal liquid. Next to it, a handwritten note in her precise, looping handwriting. For the first step, drink with honesty, wear with intention. There is no turning back. My stomach twisted. Something about the vial seemed alive, shimmering as though it were aware of my hesitation. But the prospect of the inheritance, the house, the freedom I had always longed for, was intoxicating. I lifted the vial, feeling the cool glass against my palm, and with a shaking breath I drank. The effect was immediate and disorienting. My body felt as though it were dissolving from the inside out, every fiber of muscle and bone reshaping itself in slow, deliberate waves. I doubled over, clutching my stomach as a warmth spread across my chest, a pressure that felt both foreign and thrilling. The sensation focused sharply around my torso, and I felt a distinct, undeniable change. My chest expanding, reshaping, the weight and contours unfamiliar yet oddly natural. I staggered to a mirror across the room. My reflection was unrecognizable. My hair had lengthened slightly, softer and glossier. My features were more delicate, the line of my jaw smoother, my lips fuller. And my chest had transformed in a way that made my pulse thunder in my ears. The reality of it hit me like a tidal wave. This was no temporary illusion. My body had begun its permanent change. Fear mingled with fascination. I had never imagined embracing this side of myself, yet staring at my reflection, I felt an odd sense of alignment, a quiet thrill beneath the shock. Aunt Maribel's words echoed in my mind. There is no turning back. I spent the rest of the day exploring the house she had left me. Every room felt infused with her presence. The scent of jasmine from a long-extinguished candle, the faint rustle of silk curtains, her handwritten journal stacked neatly on the desk. Her life had been full of mysteries, and now, suddenly, I was living the first page of my own. As night fell, I dressed carefully in some of the clothes I found in her wardrobe. Soft blouses, a flowing skirt, shoes that clicked delicately against the wooden floor. The reflection in the mirror now felt both alien and intimate. It was me and yet not me. And somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that perhaps Aunt Maribel had always known I would need this, to see myself fully, to become fully. I went to bed that night, mind racing, body tingling with new contours and sensations. The journey had begun. I didn't know where it would take me, or how I would survive the social, emotional, and physical transformations ahead. But one truth was undeniable. My life had changed forever, and Aunt Maribel's challenge was no longer a puzzle, it was my reality. The next morning, the house felt both comforting and strange, as if it had grown into my body overnight. The sunlight poured through the tall, lace-curtained windows, casting intricate patterns on the wooden floor. I dressed carefully in a pastel blouse and a pleated skirt, the fabric whispering against my newly sensitive skin. Each movement felt heightened, as though my body were learning new rhythms it had never known. But the challenge extended far beyond my reflection. Aunt Maribel had made it clear in her letters. I was to live fully as this new version of myself, not in secret, not behind locked doors. I had to step into the world, interact and adapt. That meant confronting people I had known all my life, and discovering whether they would see me as I was now, or recoil in confusion. The first outing was to the local grocery store. I gripped my tote bag nervously, the silk of my gloves brushing my fingers, as I stepped onto the wet pavement. Rain had left tiny puddles that reflected my elongated, unfamiliar silhouette. People glanced at me as I walked, some curiously, others with polite disinterest. But there was one unmistakable moment that rattled me. An old friend from high school, walking briskly past, did a double-take, eyes widening as he processed the change. Saddam," he stammered, voice trailing off. I swallowed hard, realizing I didn't have the luxury of hiding behind humor or deflection. "It's me," I said softly, almost a whisper. The words felt alien on my lips, carried by a new cadence I wasn't used to. He nodded slowly, uncertainty flashing across his face, and then hurried along without comment. I exhaled shakily. The first test had been terrifying, and I hadn't even bought milk yet. Back home, I began to explore the psychological nuances of my transformation. My body was changing, yes, but so was my perception. Movements felt fluid in ways they hadn't before. Gestures carried an innate elegance that wasn't just performance, it was instinct. I found myself subconsciously observing how people interacted with me differently. Softer tones, subtle deference, small acts of politeness that hadn't existed in my prior presence. It was intoxicating and simultaneously unnerving. But the challenge was deeper than external perception. Aunt Maribel's will emphasized emotional authenticity. I had to confront parts of myself I had long denied. The hidden desires, the long-suppressed curiosity, the yearning to exist fully in a form that matched my internal identity. I spent hours journaling, pouring my thoughts onto paper with the same precision and intensity one had reserved for my studies. Each entry forced me to grapple with truths I had skirted my entire life. Then came the social trials. I had to navigate friends and colleagues, to maintain connections while presenting as someone entirely different. Some relationships fractured immediately, strained by disbelief or discomfort. Others adapted, surprisingly fluidly, offering a tentative, fragile acceptance that both warmed and terrified me. I realized the challenge wasn't just living in this body. It was learning to hold space for the responses of others while remaining true to myself. One evening, I received a package in the mail, a note from Aunt Maribel, postmarked before her passing. It contained a single garment, a deep crimson dress, and a small handwritten card. "Tonight you must face yourself fully. Wear it. Stand in the mirror. Feel what it means to belong in this skin." I hesitated for hours, then finally slid into the dress. The fabric was impossibly soft, hugging my curves in ways that felt intimate and revealing. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the hem, smoothing the shoulders. The reflection staring back was no longer merely a reflection. It was an affirmation, a declaration of existence. My heart raced with a mixture of fear, excitement, and something deeper, recognition. That night, I ventured into town, to a small cafe where I had once felt invisible among strangers. Sitting at a corner table, sipping tea with trembling hands, I noticed the difference in the world's gaze. People smiled differently, approached differently, spoke differently. And for the first time I felt a strange, profound truth. The challenge was never about the clothes or the body or even the social reactions. It was about learning to inhabit the skin I had long denied, and to do so without apology. The days blurred together after that, each presenting a new hurdle. Shopping, commuting, meeting friends. Every action was a test of courage, patience, and self-acceptance. Each mirror reflected not only my outward change but the inner transformation slowly taking root. The challenge was exhausting, often emotionally raw, but it was necessary. Aunt Maribel's words repeated in my mind like a mantra. There is no turning back. There is only becoming. By the end of the second week, I realized something startling. I was no longer acting a role. The lines between who I had been and who I was becoming were dissolving. The challenge, I understood, was never meant to be conquered. It was meant to guide me toward a deeper understanding of myself, one that would define the course of the entire year ahead. Weeks bled into months. Each day a careful rehearsal in the art of becoming. What had once been a jarring shock now settled into a strange, intoxicating rhythm. I woke each morning with a body that was unmistakably mine, and yet entirely new. The curves, the softness, the subtle sway in my hips had ceased to feel foreign. I had begun to move as if my body had always been this way. The first true adaptation was physical. I learned how to walk, how to sit, how to enter a room and carry myself without hesitation. My hands, once rough and unpracticed in delicate gestures, now traced surfaces lightly, as if seeking permission from the world. Each glance in the mirror became a lesson, a calibration of posture, expression, and nuance. Even mundane acts like reaching for a cup or crossing a street now held the quiet grace of awareness. Clothing became an extension of self. The skirts, the blouses, the dresses, these were not merely garments, but instruments of embodiment. I learned the delicate interplay of fabric against skin, how a neckline could alter perception, how a sway of hair could command attention. Aunt Maribel's guidance, though absent in voice, was present in spirit. Every item in her wardrobe seemed to carry a message, a key to understanding the transformation more fully. But adaptation wasn't only physical. It was deeply emotional. I began to notice subtleties in the way people responded to me, reactions I had once ignored. A soft smile from a stranger, the respectful tilt of a head in conversation, the quiet empathy of a friend. These were signals of acceptance I hadn't anticipated. And each one, however small, shaped the way I carried myself, building confidence and shaping identity. I also faced resistance, from others and from within. Old friends sometimes faltered, uncertain of how to address me, how to relate to this new version of me. Some drifted away, leaving gaps that were both painful and illuminating. And within myself, a strange dichotomy arose. Curiosity and joy wrestled with fear and shame. Yet each day, as I navigated these moments, I felt the inner voice that Aunt Maribel had nurtured whispering, "This is who you are. Own it." Intimacy became a test of understanding. I discovered that simple touches, hands brushing, hair tucked behind ears, a gentle laugh, carried newfound significance. I experienced the world from angles I had never noticed before, the subtle power in vulnerability, the quiet strength in softness. Even solitude transformed. Nights spent reading in the glow of a lamp, wrapped in Maribel's silks, became meditative rituals. Each movement, each reflection, each breath, reinforced the growing conviction that this identity was no longer borrowed, no longer a temporary experiment. It was the essence of me. A turning point came one rainy afternoon. I had gone out for groceries and returned to find a group of neighborhood women chatting on the steps of my house. They paused when they saw me, and I felt a ripple of tension, then curiosity. For a moment, I considered retreating, hiding behind the old mask I used to wear. But instead I smiled, a deliberate, open gesture, and greeted them warmly. The ice broke. Conversation flowed, laughter followed, and by the time I stepped inside, I realized the significance. I was not merely surviving this life, I was thriving in it. The world had begun to see me not as a curiosity or anomaly, but as a person, fully present, fully embodied. Emotionally, I had started to reconcile the inner and outer selves. I no longer felt torn between two identities, no longer trapped by expectation or fear. Instead, I had embraced the subtle freedom of authenticity, the quiet confidence that comes from inhabiting a form that resonates with the soul. Each journal entry became more reflective, less about struggle and more about discovery. The soft joy of acceptance, the thrill of newfound awareness, the depth of emotion that came with living honestly. Even the challenges that once loomed, public perception, old friendships, social etiquette, now felt manageable. I had cultivated strategies, not for concealment, but for integration. And through it all, Aunt Maribel's words remained my anchor. There is no turning back. There is only becoming. By the end of the 4th month, adaptation had transformed from effortful practice into instinct. My movements, my speech, my very presence flowed with ease. The body that had initially shocked me now felt like home. My reflection was no longer startling. It was familiar, intimate, reassuring. And yet, as I drifted off to sleep one night, a soft whisper in the dark reminded me that the journey was far from over. Adaptation was not merely survival, it was preparation. The emotional awakening that lay ahead promised both revelation and reckoning. My body had become my own, but my heart and mind still had secrets to uncover. The months passed with quiet intensity. I had adapted to my new body, learned its rhythms, and navigated the delicate choreography of social life. But adaptation alone was only the surface. Beneath it, a subtle current of emotional revelation began to stir, a gentle but unstoppable tide that would reshape everything I thought I knew about myself. It began with small, almost imperceptible moments. A glance in the mirror lingered longer, no longer a check for mistakes but a meditation on self. A sigh that had once carried discomfort now felt like release, a recognition that my body, my mind, and my soul were finally aligned. I began to notice the way the world responded differently. Not only to my form but to the energy I exuded. People leaned in, listened longer, smiled more readily. There was empathy where once there had been indifference. It was subtle and yet profoundly moving. Then came the more intimate awakenings, the moments that struck deeper. One evening, while rearranging Aunt Maribel's books in her study, I stumbled upon a journal she had kept for decades. Its pages overflowed with reflections, stories of transformation, identity, and courage. One passage caught my breath. To live fully as oneself is the bravest act there is. To acknowledge the truth that lies beneath fear, beneath expectation, beneath judgment, is to honor life itself. Some may not understand, but understanding is not the point. Being is. Reading her words, I felt a surge of connection, as though she were speaking directly to the part of me that had been silent for years. The voice inside, the one I had suppressed in fear and doubt, began to resonate more clearly. I allowed myself to cry, to feel the weight of years spent hiding, the grief of lost self-recognition, and the thrill of rediscovery. Emotionally, I became more sensitive, more aware of nuance. I noticed the unspoken gestures of others, the fleeting glance of admiration, the subtle tremor of unease, the quiet kindness of strangers. Each interaction became a lesson, a mirror reflecting not only how I was perceived but how deeply I was capable of empathy. I found that the emotions I once dismissed or suppressed, joy, longing, sorrow, desire, were now vibrant, intense, and valid. Love, in its many forms, began to reveal itself. I realized that attraction was no longer a simple matter of habit or expectation. I felt drawn to people not by societal labels, but by connection, by resonance, by the sense of mutual recognition. The first time I noticed it, an intense flutter in my chest when a woman smiled warmly at me on the street, I paused, startled by the depth of the feeling. I had always thought of desire in pragmatic terms. Now it was visceral, tender, and deeply human. One night, lying in the soft sheets of Aunt Maribel's bedroom, I reflected on my journey so far. Tears streamed quietly down my cheeks as I acknowledged the fear, the exhilaration, and the profound vulnerability of living this truth. The emotional awakening was not just a phase. It was the unveiling of a self I had never allowed to emerge. I was no longer the person who had hesitated, who had doubted, who had cowered in front of mirrors. I was whole, radiant, and undeniably alive. And yet, the awakening carried shadows. Vulnerability brought fear. Fear of rejection, fear of misunderstanding, fear of losing the fragile connections I had nurtured. I wrestled with uncertainty, questioning whether I could fully inhabit this life without consequence. But each challenge reinforced the truth. Emotional authenticity demanded courage. The heart had to be exposed to blossom fully. Then, one evening, a letter arrived, handwritten in Aunt Maribel's familiar script. It read, "Saddam, the final phase awaits. You have adapted, you have awakened. Now comes the truth you have been preparing for. There is no judgment, no return, only revelation. Be ready to see yourself fully, in ways you cannot yet imagine." The words struck me with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The realization I had been building toward was approaching, a culmination of inheritance, challenge, adaptation, and awakening. I knew, deep in my core, that this truth would be both liberating and irreversible. For the first time, I felt the gravity of Aunt Maribel's final wish, not merely to live a year in another form, but to encounter the essence of myself, to embrace it, and to understand the permanence of what I had become. I drifted to sleep that night, body and heart intertwined in quiet harmony, unknowing yet eager for the revelation that awaited. The final phase began with a morning that felt impossibly still, the kind of silence that presses against the soul and demands introspection. The house was empty, the air thick with the memory of Aunt Maribel's presence, and I realized that everything I had experienced, the inheritance, the challenge, the adaptation, the emotional awakening, was leading to this moment. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, my reflection steady, unyielding, and utterly familiar. I had anticipated recognition, but the truth I faced was more profound than mere acknowledgement. It was a realization that went beyond appearance, beyond posture, beyond social perception. The body I inhabited was no longer temporary, no longer experimental. It was me, authentically, irrevocably me. The transformation I had once thought I could reverse now presented itself as permanence. The curve of my hips, the weight of my chest, the softness of my hands, they were not fleeting effects of magic or inheritance. They were reality. My reflection gazed back without hesitation, without doubt, and for the first time, I understood that the challenge had never been about performing a role. It had been about embracing truth. With this realization came a flood of memories, reflections on the months that had passed. The fear, the awkwardness, the exhilaration, the small triumphs, they were all threads in a tapestry of self-discovery. I remembered the early days, stumbling over silk gloves, terrified of the world's judgment. I remembered the first time I walked confidently down the street, feeling the subtle shift in how others perceived me. I remembered the nights spent journaling, reading Aunt Maribel's words, crying softly in the quiet of her house. All of it had led here. A life fully claimed, a self fully realized. The permanence of my form brought clarity, but also a profound sense of responsibility. I had been given a gift, the ability to live as my truest self, but it was now up to me to define what that meant. I could no longer retreat into old patterns or shy away from vulnerability. Each interaction, each choice carried weight. The world would respond, and I had to respond in turn, with honesty, courage, and compassion. That day, I ventured into town, fully aware of the permanence that defined me. I no longer worried about glances or whispers. Instead, I walked with quiet confidence, allowing the world to see me as I truly was. Some people stared, some smiled, some paused, unsure how to respond. But I noticed something remarkable. Their reactions no longer dictated my sense of self. I had been tested, shaped, awakened, and I was whole. By evening, I returned to Aunt Maribel's house, the setting sun casting a warm glow through the lace curtains. I walked slowly through the rooms, touching the surfaces she had touched, lingering over the books she had cherished. Her spirit felt present in every corner, and I realized that her final gift was not the house, not the jewelry, not the clothes. It was the courage to embrace myself fully. I stood once more in front of the mirror, and this time I did not flinch. I did not hesitate. My reflection smiled back, a perfect reflection of acceptance and understanding. I whispered softly to myself, a vow and a confession intertwined. I am who I am, and I will never turn back. In that moment, the journey of inheritance, challenge, adaptation, and awakening coalesced into truth. I was no longer a participant in an experiment, no longer a subject of a test. I was complete, fully realized, and irrevocably myself. The titties swap, the vial, the gloves, the dresses, the social trials, they were all steps, all mirrors, all guides leading me to this ultimate clarity. Aunt Maribel's voice echoed in memory, gentle and triumphant. There is no turning back. There is only becoming. And now, I understood fully. The becoming was permanent. It was beautiful. It was mine. The weeks that followed felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Life continued in its daily rhythm. Work, errands, conversations, moments of quiet reflection, but everything carried a new resonance. Every gesture, every glance in a mirror, every interaction with the world was infused with the knowledge that I was living authentically. I had grown comfortable in ways I had never imagined. The house I inherited became more than a home. It was a sanctuary, a gallery of memory and transformation. Each room held echoes of Aunt Maribel, and each echo reminded me that her final wish had been more than a test. It had been a gift. I learned to embrace the permanence of my form with ease. I moved, spoke, and lived with a quiet confidence that once would have terrified me. But even more important was the internal shift. I had discovered courage I didn't know I possessed, empathy I had never cultivated, and a sense of identity that was unshakable. Socially, I found my place again. Some friends had drifted, unable or unwilling to reconcile the change. But new connections had formed, relationships deepened by honesty and openness. I had learned that living authentically required not only courage but patience and grace, both with myself and with others. The reflection in the mirror no longer startled me. It was me, fully, irrevocably, beautifully me. And for the first time I realized that the transformation had been about more than appearances or societal expectations. It had been about truth, self-recognition, and the courage to step fully into the life I was always meant to lead. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I would sit in Aunt Maribel's study, holding her journals, tracing her words with my fingers, and feeling her presence as a gentle, guiding force. And I would whisper a soft, grateful acknowledgement to her, to myself, to the journey that had reshaped everything. Thank you for showing me who I am. I had inherited more than a house, more than clothes, more than jewels. I had inherited clarity, courage, and the knowledge that identity is not defined by fear or expectation, but by the truth we dare to live. The year she had asked me to embrace had become a lifetime of understanding, a permanent transformation that I would carry forward with pride, grace, and love for the self I had discovered. And as I closed the door each evening, looking out at the quiet streets of the town I now called home, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I had journeyed beyond return, through challenge, adaptation, and awakening, to stand fully in the reality of who I was meant to be. I smiled softly at my reflection one last time before turning off the lights. My story, Aunt Maribel's gift, and my truth were now inseparable, woven into the very fabric of my existence. And for the first time I truly understood. There was no undoing it, no hesitation, only the enduring beauty of living authentically. Thanks for watching.